8. All right, so here we go into the 7th part of Joel, and we're getting close to the 2nd chapter. Ooh, only 4 or 5 more verses to go, and we'll be in the 2nd chapter. So, but this is maybe a study that we'll have to just really hunker down and pay more attention to, because it might be hard to follow. I don't know. So we'll hopefully that it won't be. So hopefully it'll be not as, maybe I was too sleepy when I read it. So, but let's talk to the boss and we'll see if we can get some help from that direction. But Master Yahuwah, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for your word, for your encouragement. We ask that you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us, and listen to your spirit when you direct us. In the name of Yahshua, amen. All right, so the 7th part of Joel. So in the past several studies, we've considered some issues that separate us from Yahuwah Elohim. We've considered progressive thinking, dumbing down or changing scripture to agree with dogma. We considered becoming lax in spending quality time with Yahuwah. And finally, last week, we considered a loss of fruitfulness that follows. But we consider these things, and we have to say that thinking about these things, just thinking about them, doesn't really change anything. What we're going to consider in this study is the idea of actually doing something to change any of these or all of these that might apply to our lives. And if we're honest with each other, all of these apply at one point or another in our lives. So we're also going to see that making teshuvah while still holding on to transgression is still transgression. You know, we make teshuvah, but we still have that inkling, did it really work, or am I forgiven, or any of that. We'll cover that in a minute. But so if we hold on to that, we're still walking in the transgression. And so this transgression keeps us separated from Elohim. And this is about fine-tuning teshuvah is basically what this, I guess if we were going to put a title on it, fine-tuning teshuvah. And we start with Yoel 1:13, chapter 1, verse 13, that says, "Gird yourselves and lament, you Kohanim. Wail, you ministers of the altar. Come lie all night in sackcloth, you ministers of my Elohim. For the meal offering and the drink offering is withheld from the house of your Elohim." So, something to think about here. So the first thing we're going to consider is this idea of girding yourselves. It's an interesting concept, what we're going to find in this word for gird. The word is higru, that literally means to put on a belt, but it can also mean to put on armor. It can also mean to put on armor. And this is the interesting part about this, as we're going to see in a minute. The next word is visivdu, meaning to mourn. And this is the part that I found interesting in this, is that we are putting on armor prior to mourning, prior to crying about discovering that we've been in a state of spiritual poverty, so to speak. And this is actually good advice. We're going to consider this from the point of view of the Beatitudes, from the Sermon on the Mount from Yeshua. And this is in Matthew 5:3-4, where he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the realm of the heavens. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And we say, okay, well, this is two separate things. But in reality, it's a progression of things. Blessed are they who are spiritually poor. When you figure out that you're spiritually poor, because now the realm of heaven is open to you. It's going to listen to what you have to say. And then, because I've realized that I'm in this state of spiritual poverty, then I'm mourning, because if I'm truly, sorry or whatever you want to call it for being this penitent, then I'm going to have those feelings about it. But we never think about maybe that there's a gap in between those two things. So here we understand that once we recognize our spiritual poverty, which can include any of the conditions listed in the introduction of this study, and more, but these are just particular to the study, we are accepted into the realm of Elohim. Once we understand that this spiritual condition has caused us to become separated from Yahweh Elohim, and we come to the point of mourning, to being sorrowful about having separated ourselves, we are comforted. But it's between these that we have to protect ourselves from the enticements of the Satan. This is a very brief gap between these, that the Satan brings self-condemnation, and that we have to be prepared to overcome the enticements that will be waved in front of our faces. Now, these are some of the questions that pop up. Are you sure that everything's going to be all right? How do you know that Yahweh Elohim is accepting you? How do you know that you can be forgiven? And these are questions that people have actually asked me in the past. So all of these, okay. Once we understand where we are and that we need to make teshuvah, we have to put the armor on. And I've included an older lesson in the middle of this. In fact, I included 2 older lessons in the middle of this that I want to review, just for us to be able to understand what it is to put the armor on, and then what spiritual authority do we have to push the Satan away, push these enticements away. Say, hey, yeah, I'm forgiven. Yes, it really worked. You have no hold on me. I'm going to grieve because I've been separated from my Elohim. You need to move on down the road into that nice, hot, dry space. But anyway, so this is called our spiritual armor. And I think we did this a couple of years ago. This is a really old lesson. It says, in our walk with Elohim, we come under regular attack from a variety of sources. This lesson deals with satanic enticement and defines those categories and tools that the word of Elohim provides us with. So it defines the categories of satanic enticement and gives us the tools that the word of Elohim gives us to overcome these things. Now, the strategy of the Satan is to subdue the weaker, more vulnerable things first, and then once this is accomplished, overcome our strongholds. Now, there's 4 categories here to consider. So we think about Dalet. That means a door, and it also means spiritual poverty. So it's either a doorway into spiritual poverty or a doorway out of it. But these 4 are, we start with principalities. Their target area is the head. Now, the head contains the eyes, and we think about the head, it also contains the ears. So not only do we see, we can also hear things. Contains the mouth, we can also speak things. Then it contains the brain, where we can just have thoughts. So all of these are areas where negative things can be produced. This is where the Satan strikes first. He's going to try to shut down the communications. If you shut down a communication to a fortress you're trying to overtake, then it's a lot easier to overtake it because they can't be resupplied with anything. So, but the head contains the eyes and the ability to judge and discern truth. The strategy of the principalities is accusation. Although there is power in the truth, without good judgment or discernment, It is one of the weakest areas to attack, and without a good foundation or a strong foundation in the Word, it can be torn apart by lies, deception, temptation, oppression, and accusation. So here is where we read a lot of times in the Christian Bible, it tells us the helmet of salvation. But really that doesn't tell us a whole lot, because what is salvation specifically? This is the helmet of redemption, deliverance, and restoration that protects us from accusation. It redeems us from whatever we sell ourselves into. It delivers us from the messes we get ourselves into, because all of this is in the mind. This is how you do it. Follow the instructions, you can get out of it. And it restores us back to being able to function the way we should function. And we find this in Psalm 1 is a good place to start reading about how to overcome these. The second of these is authorities. Their target area is the heart. In the heart is where we feel. It's where our emotions divide and conquer. And we remember that the plagues of Egypt, because of his dark perception, these things started in the heart because he hardened his heart. So they start in the heart. But in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 13, we read that love never fails. The breastplate of righteousness protects us from temptation, pride, and vanity. And if we read the 13th Psalm, it tells us about all these negative gobbledygooks that we need to get out of, and it tells us that love overcomes all of these. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 13, pretty much the whole chapter. So, the next one is possessors. Their target area is the stomach, as we are what we eat. If we eat and digest truth, then we're nourished by it. If, on the other hand, we eat and digest lies and deception, that's what gets into our system. We put on the belt of truth in order to guard against the malnutrition of satanic enticement. Then we come to evil spirits, and everybody has their own little definition of evil spirits, and we read about these possessing people and having to be cast out and all this through the Bezorah. But their target area is the feet. Specifically, this entity of enticement uses oppression to stifle growth in the assembly, specifically the assembly of Yahuwah. Our feet represent freedom of movement. What better way to stop the witness of the Bezorah, the message of Yahshua, than through oppression of Yahuwah's people, by those possessed to a point of doing whatever is necessary to stop the word from going forward. Therefore, we wear the shoes of peace, which represent who we are, believers in the redemption, deliverance, and restoration of Yahuwah and his anointing that was made possible by Yahshua and is available today to all who will believe and receive. We recognize that Yahuwah is always present and that his anointing surrounds and fills us. And we trust the Ruach of Yahuwah to lead us where we go, and we know to peacefully wipe off the dust of our shoes from those who refuse to hear about the love and redemption that Yahuwah offers to all by and through Yahshua. So Yahuwah Elohim has said that he will never leave us or forsake us. We enter into the covenant relationship with Yahuwah through the blood of Yahshua, his word and our Redeemer, deliverer, and restorer. Yahuwah Elohim has equipped us and has armed us to win in spiritual warfare. We must therefore use all of the tools that Elohim has given us in order to overcome. Now, that's a mouthful to consider what we need to do in the little bitty, teeny tiny gap between recognizing I've made a mistake and being penitent about it, being, grieving about it, and then making teshuvah and forgetting it. So there's that little bitty gap where the Satan creeps in and says, you can make teshuvah, but it's not going to work. So this is where we put this armor on now to strengthen us. So while we're recapping, we'll consider some ideas from another older study about our spiritual authority. Between recognizing our spiritual poverty and our mourning about it is a critical space, and as we've considered, one that we must be aware of. And this recap is to understand our authority to overcome the enticements of the Satan and how to adjust the armor that we put on. Now, we've just talked about the armor that we put on and how the Satan attacks different pieces of us in order to get us to turn away. Here is what powers the whole thing. And this is called spiritual authority. It's a lesson in growth. Everyone has to grow. Growing in the authority that we've been given has no end. It does, however, have a beginning. This study is a look at that beginning and the first few steps of the growing process. And this is from Proverbs 9, verse 10. It says, "The reverence of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of being dedicated to him is understanding." It's a little different than what we read it in King Jimmy. It says, "The reverence of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of being dedicated to him is understanding." So it's not the knowledge of being holy, because we say, well, what does that mean? The knowledge of being exalted, the knowledge of being a deity, or is it the knowledge of being dedicated to Yahweh is where we start to understand. So we begin this verse and break it down in its roots, and we're going to kind of tear these Hebrew words down, and then we're going to compile a, let's see if I can get this thing to be quiet because it likes to go off. Okay, so we start with the word tehillat. Now, this is different than the word tehillah. Tehillah, spelt with the hey, means psalm. Tehillot, spelt with the het, means the beginning of, as opposed to resh. We read Bereshis, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's okay. We read Bereshis, which would actually mean in the authority of. If it was actually, if Bereshis was actually going to tell us about the beginning, then maybe it should have said Betehillat, in the beginning, because this is the beginning of time. Bereshis isn't really telling us about the beginning of time, it's beginning of an authority, but there we go. I've given it all away. Thank you very much. We're done. Yeah. No. So Tehillat, the beginning of. The root of this word is Tehillah, which means beginning or from the beginning, as in the commencement of something. Now the root of this word is halal, that brings us clues as to what this beginning is. This word means to make common. It also means to violate the honor of, to profane the name of, to wound, to pierce, and to be slain. The root of this word is hul, which means to be brought forth and to be born. So this word illustrates to us the power of Yahshua as the vehicle of sacrifice, whose blood gives us the authority to overcome, as opposed to Bereshit, that means in the authority, that illustrates the authority of Yahshua to become the vehicle of sacrifice. He was given the authority as the word by Yahuwah to become the vehicle of sacrifice, but here it's telling us that it gives us the authority to overcome because of the blood. The next word is chokhmah, that means wisdom. This is from the root chakam, that means to become wise, to be wise, to make wise, to teach, to instruct. Next is yirat, the reverence. We translate this as fear because you were supposed to be afraid of this wrathful God of the Old Testament. We lost the idea of reverence, looking up to, respecting. So the word yirah means reverence and respect. The root of this word is yareh, which means morally reverent. And then we say reverent to what? the next word in line is the name of Elohim. That means who is, who was, and who is to come. The root of this name is Chaya, which means to exist. In considering that in his name we see the beginning, the middle, and the end, then we understand that Yahuwah is truth. In the root of his name we see existence. So with these two things we understand that in reverencing Yahuwah we gain truth as well as existence in everything at every time. The verse says that this is the beginning of wisdom. So what do we find in the beginning? That Yahshua was created as the concept by the truth, power, and the ability of Yahuwah. It was because of that Yahshua as the concept, the redemption, the deliverance, and the restoration that would come from Yahuwah was manifested and then brought forth as Yahshua, the Son of Man, to be the vehicle of sacrifice, to allow this to become a reality for us. That's power for us. That's a very powerful thing, as we're going to find out in a minute. The next word in this verse is veda'at, that means and knowledge. This word means to perceive, to discern, to understand. The root of this word is yada, that means to know, to perceive, to see, to discern, to recognize, to become acquainted with, to be instructed. And very interesting that it also means to be aware of a familiar friend. It's a lot of stuff for one word, but Hebrew's an explosive language that never means just one thing. Now, kedoshim, dedicated. We talked about kedoshim in our Torah portion, kedoshim, that the whole idea of holiness is kind of a crazy notion that started around the 4th century with our friend Constantine and his bishop buddies. But this word means dedicated. It's from the word kedosh or kadosh, meaning not only set apart, but it also means to dedicate oneself to. There's no real word for holy in Hebrew. It's a foreign concept. It's a Greco-Roman concept that creeped in. The root of this word is kadash, that means to consecrate, dedicate, prepare, and proclaim. It also means to devote oneself, to set oneself apart, and to consecrate oneself, which is the same thing as to set oneself apart. And finally we come to the word binah, that means understanding. This word means to act with understanding and to think with understanding. The root of this word is biyin, that means to perceive, to discern, to know with one's mind, to observe, to give heed to have insight, to know oneself, to show oneself to be attentive, and to be diligent. It also means to teach and to instruct, and it means to know the difference between good and evil. So what have we just seen in this verse that we saw in our study of Noah? That we have knowledge that becomes wisdom, and then with knowledge and wisdom being applied, it becomes understanding. That in the ark you had the 3 levels, the lower level, the middle level, and the upper level. And at the upper level was the window where the light came in. In the ark, he learned how to take care of the clean and the unclean animals. And this is what we learn. This is our relationship with Elohim, is that we move along learning and growing in Elohim. But it's a very powerful thing that is provided for us, is this relationship. So if we take all of that, all of those definitions and all of that long-winded narrative and put it together, it kind of gives us this kind of an idea. Moral reverence is to reverence and respect the name of Yahweh, which is not only the source of our existence, but the source of truth. The source of this truth is from the beginning, as the Word who would come forth and be born as the Son, being made common. That his honor and his name would be profaned, that he would be wounded, pierced, and slain, so that through his blood we would be restored back to a relationship with the Father, who is Yahuwah. that he would teach and instruct us to become wise and to be able to perceive, discern, and understand, in order to see and recognize him as a familiar friend, that in doing so we might be set apart and dedicated to Yahuwah our Elohim and our Father, and that through him we would devote ourselves through his instruction, proclaiming Yahuwah in our acts and in our thoughts, that we would learn to observe and give heed to the word and gain insight, knowing good from evil by and through it. It's a lot of words for one simple little verse. But like I said, Hebrew is an explosive language. It tells us a whole lot in a very little amount of space. Reverencing Yahuwah through his word shows us the path to life. Yahshua is the way, the truth, and the life. We come to the Father through him, and in this and for this we exist. Now, Yahshua made the way for us to be redeemed, delivered, and restored, not only from the death of sin, but, this is the kicker, so that we would be empowered to be able to overcome the enticements of the Satan. He didn't just deliver us from the wage of sin, which is death. His blood empowered us to be able to overcome the enticements of the Satan. He empowered us to be able to say, "Get behind me, Satan." He empowered us to say, "You have no authority over me," if we believe and receive. But when we doubt, when we say, "Did this work? I hope this works. Am I really forgiven? I've made all these mistakes in the past. Can he overlook all these mistakes?" Then we're given the power back to the adversary. Yahshua paid for that. There's no sense to hold on to it. So now we have an idea of the spiritual armor, where these enticements attack, how to repel these enticements, and now we have an idea of the power that powers up all this super duper Power Ranger armor that we can put on that can help us to repel all these attacks. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, with all this in mind, everybody okay? Okay. With all this in mind, we can go back to our verse in Yoel that continues with the phrase, "You Kohanim, wail, you ministers of the altar." So the direction to put on armor, the direction to put on armor before morning is being given to the Kohanim. These are the teachers, the ministers, the servants of the altar. The word used for altar is misbeach, that from its root, zabach, means to offer up a sacrifice. So this direction is being given to those who offer up to Yahuwah specifically. Now, if we say that we are in a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim, then this group of people applies to us. So we are the Kohanim here. We are the ministers of the altar in this phrase. This is important for us to grasp because we're going to see that again in a minute. Now, the next phrase is an interesting phrase. It says, "Come, lie all night in sackcloth." They have that on sale at Walmart if anybody's wanting to lie all night in it, by the way. Okay. The word for come is bo'u. That means to come. It also means to enter in. The word for lie all night is linu, that actually means to abide or to cause to rest. Night, as a word, isn't specifically stated here, but it's implied. So it's not actually in the verse. The word for sackcloth is vesakim, that can mean sackcloth, but also means to show humility, to be humble. So instead of reading this verse as "come lie all night in sackcloth," we might consider "enter in and find your rest in humility." Enter in and find your rest in humility. To be humble is to understand that Yahuwah is stronger than we are, and that his forgiveness is greater than ours. Now hold on to that idea, that his forgiveness